Yep. Yep. That's definitely the way.
Well, I mean, we've got, in my group alone, Blackfish Action members, we've got people all over the state, all over the country, and some even overseas. It's impossible for them to get together any given moment, like at a building. So it is, the Zoom's good for that.
Yep. Awesome. Hey, Greg.
G'day, Scott. G'day, Stephen. Nice to see your face, having talked to you on the phone the other day.
Oh, righto. How are you?
Good. G'day, Will.
Good.
G'day, Henry.
I've got to talk to you again about that. I'm getting that. I've got a shipping container. I'm doing the wall today.
Fantastic.
I was going to give you a bell and you should give me a quote.
I'm happy to talk anytime. Anytime. Scott,
how are you?
Yeah, all good. All good.
Do you want to practice anything else?
No, I might just share my screen, so when you're ready, you can.
Hang on, just do it for a moment and then stop it, because I'm just going to run through a couple of housekeeping things before you start. Just about people muting unless they have something to say. And also want to just clarify with you, are you happy for people to ask questions along the way, or would you like to wait till the end?
Either or, either way.
I think it works better if people can ask as they go, because then they can sort of, otherwise they might forget their question.
Yeah, okay.
That looks good to me. Can you share the other screen though? Because I can see your tiles on the left.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Yep, hang on a second. How's that?
Same.
Oh, shit. Really?
Close that screen.
How's that one? No. Oh, hang on. I have to stop sharing that first. Oh, geez.
You had it perfect this afternoon.
Yeah, it's always the way, isn't it? How about that one?
Perfect.
Yep.
That's very good. That's very good.
Can I leave that up as my face, or?
It certainly can. Yep.
Yeah, no right. Yeah, that makes it easier for me.
Yep. No worries. So what is it now? 7:26. We're a bit early.
Yeah, mate. No worries.
I also wondered, Scott, if it would be possible for you, before you launch into your presentation, if you could just give those of us that are a little bit excited about the spiny craze a little bit of a synopsis of how you went the last couple of weeks. Just basically tell people what you told me the other day. Everyone loves Murray craze.
All right. Can we do that at the end?
We can certainly do that at the end. Yep.
Right.
And
look, I can run through the yeah, that's fine. Yep.
you don't have to say more than you want to say. It's just that I know that a lot of people are excited about Murray craze, and I think a lot of people in ANGFA feel pretty strongly about their conservation.
Yep.
Which I'm sure, I think we talked about that the other day.
Yep.
About, is it possible at any stage that there'll be a 12-month closed season on them, or is it too big a ship to turn around? Or is it really necessary? Are they doing so well that we don't need to have a closed season for 12 months? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Hey, Daryl. G'day, Paul. No need to unmute if you're muted. G'day, Jibe. Forster. Very professional looking title page there, Mr. Raymond.
There's a few good pickies, isn't there?
Very nice.
I just added the angler one today. Actually, I was looking through for some photos of some wetlands that we've just assessed the week before last.
Is that made of steel?
Yeah, it's probably 3 foot high. We're just driving on a back road up a Greta Valley somewhere.
Wow.
And it's actually a letterbox. So the poor old postie, so that the teeth are actually metal.
How are you supposed to post a letter in that without getting a
Very carefully, I assume. Yeah, it's a beauty, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, it's a long way from the coast.
Yep. That little light works too. We drove past it at night.
Wow.
You see the little bulb right in front of his camp?
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Awesome. G'day, Paul Byam. Don't reply, you're muted. It's all good. Are you due to go back into the field in the next short while, Scott, or are you based now with lockdown at home?
Yeah, well, next week got knocked off, so we were going to do, I think we had Barmer next week, the electrofishing the river, and then 2 weeks after that we had crays, southern pygmies, another, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks of cray stuff, week on, week off until September. So
Wow, that's
I know it's pretty
stuff.
full on. Took on a little bit more than I can chew, so
Wow,
we'll see how it goes. Lots of students, I think we're going to have to put on for that. So, but that'll be good.
that's very good, very good. 7:30. We've got to wait a little bit longer because.
I'll just write some notes down on these crays.
Yep, no worries. No problem. Are there ever opportunities for non-ARI people to help with the cray work, Scott, or is it a closed?
Yeah. Well, I've got 2 of my old honours students from last year. Both of the girls are going to come out and give us a hand with some field work in probably 5 or 6 weeks' time. So I've got another young fellow that just contacted me today from La Trobe Uni. He's a 3rd-year student, and a lot of the universities now, you need to do 80 to 100 hours in a research institute as part of their final year. So we get a lot from Melbourne and La Trobe.
Yeah, right.
So, and I'm the volunteer coordinator at work. So yeah, they all get pushed my way. So yeah, we tend to use them quite a bit for, we do larval drift work in October, November, December throughout Barmer.
So are you using a plankton net for that?
Well, it's like a plankton net. Yeah, so it's a conical net. I think the throat's about 800 wide, and it concertinas down into just a small collection tube. So it filters obviously eggs and small larval fish.
How many microns is the fabric?
500, I think.
And then you've got to identify eggs.
Yeah, well, you can actually grow the eggs out. So predominantly it's golden perch and silver perch.
Yeah,
So,
right.
and when we collect those, so we get the sample, which has obviously been in the water, and we put that through a sieve in the water, and you can pick the eggs out. And once you bring the eggs back to work, we just keep them in an open container, and they hatch after 36 to 48 hours, being goldens and silver perch. And you can identify the fish based on oil globules and other criteria. So we do that to get a ratio of silver perch to golden perch spawning, that sort of thing. So we get the students so we'll have a sub sample where we do that. So for each of so there's 5 survey runs we do a fortnight apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get a small sub sample and go, okay, well, that's how many, but that's what the ratio is that we've worked out for goldens versus silvers.
Mm.
And then we go back and we might apply that to 300 or 400 eggs for that survey period.
Mm.
And then we look at the impacts. We compare the number and the ratio of each of the different species with the discharge down the river, and we can look at who's spawning when and where, and if there's any cues that are relevant to species spawning.
So what parameters are you recording? Temperature? Flow?
Yeah. So we do all the water quality parameters, and then we have discharge on top of that. So basically it's one of the 8 icon sites throughout the Murray-Darling Basin. And there's a multitude of components to it, but it's a long-term general trend analysis.
Right.
So even though each year we do get quite specific on species and whatnot, it's used. It was developed, I think, in 2002 by the Murray-Darling Basin Commission in light of the fact that the health of the river was declining. So they wanted to be able to determine whether that decline or was real or not, and just have a look at the trends in fish populations and communities over decades. So we've pretty much been doing that for almost 20 years now. So
continuously.
Each year, yeah. So it pretty much starts off with the larval drift work in October to December. Then we go back when the floodplain, the water's off the floodplain. So we've got 12 sites. We mix between Barmer wetlands and the Millawa wetlands because it's a collaborative project with New South Wales DPI.
Yep.
So we survey each of the 6 wetland habitats and small tributaries.
Yes.
And then we go back, well, usually this time of year, if we can get up there, and survey the river. So we've got long-term monitoring sites that we electrofish with large boats and nets and whatnot, as well as at the same time, we do all of the crayfish monitoring as well. For that project, we do have another project that's a lot more intensive, which we've written our papers on. So that's, yeah, we've got a few more papers coming up out of that. So that'll be pretty exciting.
Awesome. So that's a 20-year data set.
For the icon site, yeah.
The icon site, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and there's 8 icon sites throughout the system. So hopefully they'll get around soon to analysing all of them together.
Very exciting. Look, it's about 6:30. Just a couple of housekeeping things for people that join. Well, people that are already joined, obviously, but other people won't know. But if you can keep your mic muted unless you have something burningly important to say, if you can write down or memorise any questions and ask Scott at the end, it might flow a bit easier for Scott. I think that's all. Any other things you feel strongly about making clear, Scott, before you begin?
No, not at all. I'm happy if people want to make comments or ask questions throughout.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I'll hand it over to you, and I would really appreciate you joining us tonight, Scott, and all the work that you put into it. So the screen is yours.
Thanks very much. Well, thanks for the invitation. It's a real privilege, I must say. So look, the way I wanted to run it was to give a brief overview of a global following on to an Australian context of impacts to freshwater systems, and then talk about conserving small species through conservation translocations using southern pygmy perch as a case study. So these are just a couple of photos of one of my colleagues electrofishing one of the small creeks where we got the southern pygmy perch brood stock from. So we can see here the competing interests for our freshwater resources have extensively modified natural aquatic systems. We can see this through the channel straightening and subsistence agriculture and broad scale cropping, cattle and damming of our river resources, to the point where over the last 200 years, we've seen an 87% decline in global wetlands and regulation of more than 80% of our large rivers across the globe, making these habitats some of the most threatened habitats on Earth. So in an Australian context, we are a country of extremes. We have large freshwater flood and rainfall systems in the north and declining rains and water in the south. So they're highly variable, they're heavily regulated, we have frequent droughts, and we have, over the last 200 years, seen a massive increase in the human population. This has led the MDBA in 2002 to put forward that there was a 90% decline in the abundance of native fish throughout the basin since European settlement. So of our 330 species of native fish, 70% of those are small-bodied fish species. And without intervention, many of these species are expected to become extinct over the following decades. So conserving our threatened small-bodied native fish, some of the methods available include habitat protection, such as you can see at the top there, they're putting snags in the water, collecting brood stock from the wild and rearing them in hatcheries to be released at a future date in locations where species have and haven't occurred in the past, and species translocations, which is what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this talk. So the human mediation of moving living organisms within their known range is a recognised strategy that has been widely used in Australia to re-establish freshwater fish species, including the trout cod, Macquarie perch, galaxids, gudgeons, and hardyhead. So what I'm going to do now is just go through the translocation process using an 8-step approach that we've developed using the guidelines from reintroductions developed by the IUCN. And we've also, over the last 5 years that we've been doing our translocation research, we've come up with a number of an additional ideas, I guess, that we've put into our own strategies of how we go about undertaking fish translocations. So the first step is to establish a project outline to clarify objectives and guide the development of outcomes. This seems pretty basic, and it was the one thing that I failed to do at the very start of the project. It was only in the second year that I came across the IUCN guidelines and read through those and really started to have a good think about what we're doing, how we're going to do it, why we're going to do it, and how we're going to show whether it was successful or not. So from the IUCN project outlines, we put forward our aims, and in this case it was to reduce the extinction risk of the northern form of southern pygmy perch. So our objective was to establish 20 self-sustaining refuge populations in private farm dams. Some of the actions there, you can see that we've undertaken a site selection, community engagement, and collecting and translocating fish. And perhaps something that's been a little bit undervalued over the years is monitoring. So it's fantastic to go out into the wild, collect fish, chuck them in dams, breed them up, grab them, chuck them back into the wild, see how they go. But unless we've got a methodology and design to detect whether those fish are healthy for one and whether they're recruiting and whatnot, is something that is undervalued and we think needs to be included as a significant component of any translocation reintroduction project. So,
sorry, can I just pause you there for a minute? Can you go back one slide?
Yep.
Do you, in order to guarantee an ongoing funding source, do you need to be able to demonstrate success in what you're doing, or is it such a new field that you're still sort of finding your way?
I don't know that there's criteria that we have to show success. I think it's more about how we engage and how we determine success and how we go about showing success. I mean, if we come up with a project outline in some form that's a success. I mean, it's an outcome. It's not a significant outcome, but as we see, as we move through the next 7 steps, we'll probably get a bit better of an idea of some of the what we see as successful projects. So often failures are successful in that they provide critical information for the future of translocations. So, okay.
Okay.
So knowing your species, that's obviously fairly critical, especially when we're looking at ameliorating threats. So we really need to have an idea of what those threats are before we can attempt to ameliorate those. And we can formulate strategies to help remove those threats and to help us to gain more knowledge on how to, go about threat abatement. So in the case of the southern pygmy perch, some of the traits that we're aware of include their preference for slow flowing still water with abundant in-stream vegetation.
Mm-hmm.
They're visual predators, they're moderately fecund, and their breeding season is from late spring through to midsummer. We also know that their threats include predation by native and alien species, pumping, flooding, habitat fragmentation, population fragmentation also, loss of in-stream habitat, and exotic species through competition, predation, and exclusion. So I think I've really put this slide in there to help guide the translocation process, in that the more we understand our species requirements, the better we are equipped at ameliorating problems and providing habitats and scenarios which support small-bodied native fish translocations. So our third step was to engage the local community. This is probably one of the most important steps of all. I mean, it seems, it was something that I overlooked at the start. I thought, oh, well, I knew I had to do it, but I didn't see I saw the value in it, but I didn't think it was going to be as important as it has been over the last 5 or 6 years. These guys are really the ones that have actually driven on and taken the project under their wings and allowed us onto their properties, come out with tea and scones every time we arrive and show us their favourite sites and give us a history of the dams, which is really important, component of assessing dams too. They love coming out and telling us the last time that the dams dried up and what other animals they've seen, the stocking histories, that sort of stuff. So they're really, really lovely people and they're really informative. So, we primarily did it through land care. So Sally Day from the Greta Valley Land Care Group and I got together and we held a couple of workshops with landowners and where we went around and we spoke to people at their homes and at meetings in town halls, just to outline what we were trying to achieve and how we were going to go about achieving that, and whether they had dams that they thought might be suitable. So that was really provided us with an avenue to gauge landholder interest. And from that, we got a list of potential refuge locations. So that was really, really important. So following on from this list, I think we had a list of about 25 originally in 2017. And from that, we thought, okay, well, let's go through and let's assess these sites, because some of them were clearly, not suitable. They were muddy and they had carp in them, and there was no emergent, submergent, fringing or any other vegetation within 100 metres. So, so some of the assessments that we did, I got together with Sally from the Land Care, and I think these are some documents that she created that we modified over the last 3 or 4 years. So you can see up here, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but we've got contact details up the top, followed by the site location for us, for our mapping purposes. And then we've got a space for photos. So this is an electronic version. So we can input data and photos and information in it. So then we've got some physiological criteria that we can write down, such as the size of the dam and whatnot. So water supply is next. That's really, really important criteria, because a lot of these programs in Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales, whilst a lot of them have been really quite successful, and there's a lot of really knowledgeable and interested people involved in them, that seems to be one of the criteria that's led to some unsuccessful projects, is water supply. And hydrology is a really complex science, and we've had the situation on a number of occasions where people have said, this dam didn't go dry during the millennium drought, it hasn't gone dry for the last 10,000 years, blah, blah, blah. We put southern pygmies in there, next year she's dry.
Wow.
So unfortunately, that it does happen. So I think I've talked about this a little bit later on. It is, potentially to use the services of, expert hydrologists when you come to assessing some of these potential refuge habitats, because that really provides us with some supporting information of whether we're actually going to use those sites or not. So from downstairs, so known wildlife, so that's whether people have stocked dams in the past, whether they've seen fish in there, whether there's turtles in there, that sort of thing. And then the second part of that assessment sheet is the type and the extent of the in-stream vegetation, and then some external vegetation criteria, in-stream habitat, exotic species, and whether people are willing to undertake further enhancements, because often we get a beautiful looking dam, and unfortunately there's 400 or 500 cows that drink from it, and it creates a bit of an issue. So if people are willing to have off-stream watering systems installed and fencing that we can pay for, then obviously they get a big tick for that. So, and that table furthest to the right, sorry, it's difficult to fit it all on one slide, but it's just where we've gotten all of the criteria that we've assessed on those sites, and we've used this to prioritize sites. So if we had 40 farm dams and we could only have enough fish for 10 of those, we've given them all a number, and the criteria that we've used is up here on the right, whether it's spring fed, whether it's above a 2, 5, 10, 50-year flood level, the size of the dam, the type of vegetation, whether there's exotic species, and that sort of thing. So, and we've recently need to add landholder interest as a criteria, because that, when properties change hands and that sort of thing, sometimes you just have to make the decision based on people's interest in the project to cut it or otherwise. So that's obviously something that, there's a couple of big funding bids going around at the moment, and those big bids are using these criteria, along with some that have been established recently in New South Wales for small body fish species translocations. So collecting and translocating fish seems pretty straightforward. It often is, but there's situations where it can go awry. So I've put this, including additional protective measures, as part of your guidelines, because often when you're undertaking surveys or experiments or anything else, you don't think of all of the consequences of the actions that you're undertaking prior to you undertaking them. So the first time that we went out and collected southern pygmy perch, we went along about 100 metres of stream, and I soon realised that we were taking out every single pygmy perch that we collected. And I thought, oh, this can't be good. This is a source population. What are we doing? You know, we're stealing from the, you know, poor, you know, with the hope of creating some sort of living museum refuge habitats for species that we might inadvertently be contributing to their local extinction. So we came up with this idea on the spot. We put all the fish back, and we came up with the idea of only collecting 50% of the adults that we came across. And we further modified that if we caught 2 fish that were together, because it often seemed when we were in Hughes Creek that we would come across what looked like a pair of fish. And they were both adults, both living in the same location. So the decision was further modified to take and leave alternate pairs of fish, because we thought, well, obviously we don't want to take each of every single pair that we come across. So we came up with that modified regime, which I think is probably a really important component, given that we don't know the impact of our removal for these farm dams on source populations, and that's something that's obviously pretty critical. So something else was the transportation of fish. So we obviously put them in 22-litre barrels. They were enclosed. We filled them to the top so there was no sloshing of water. We put those small barrels in larger containers in the back of the tray. We also put ice in there to prevent the water temperatures from changing rapidly. And we also included some additives to assist with, you know, slime and the health of the fish. So we then we measured and acclimated and released the fish into the farm dams on the same day that the fish were captured. So we never kept any fish overnight. And there was just some, you know, you guys are probably more across this than I am, you know, animal husbandry of small-bodied native fish. So we see a lot of people picking them up, slapping them down, weighing them, measuring them, and just chucking them in the receiving waters without, you know, appropriate care. So we think that's a pretty important component. So I've just added that table up there. That was our first year of translocation. So you can see there we had 4 farm dams, of which we put in an assortment of southern pygmy perch that came from a variety of locations. So we were just trying to maintain the genetic integrity there and mix as many as we possibly could. So as I mentioned before, monitoring, it's the means to establish whether your project has been successful or not. Whilst that's not entirely true, I mean, just establishing a project and outlining your aims and your objectives and giving your talks to the community and picking 40 sites, holding your meetings, assessing those sites, they're all successes. You know, they're not huge wins, but they're all a necessary part of the whole process. So, So in the first report, I wrote that these were going to be our measures of success to the Golden Broken Catchment Management Authority. So we were going to go back 12 months after we translocated fish into the farm dams to see if they'd survived. And they had survived. And we thought, oh, that's fantastic. That's a big tick for us. You know, they'll be happy. It's a proof of concept. And, you know, everyone was really excited. We went to, I think, the last dam, and we realised that half of the fish that we caught were less than 20 mil long. And we thought, holy cow, they've bred and successfully recruited into the population. So that was another couple of ticks for us. And whilst they're important short-term wins, it is really important to note that other people have also had these short-term successes, yet a lot of those projects seem to have fallen over at the 5, 6, 7 year mark, and we're not entirely sure. We don't know whether that's because the numbers have grown up, they've eaten themselves out of house and home. We've somehow, I assume that it wouldn't be genetics that shorter time period, but yeah, so we're not entirely on top of why some of those Refuge have failed, but they have. So it's something for us to learn from. So look, I've just added this note here that we do need to use survey techniques and methodologies that are scientifically reproducible. Otherwise, it's very difficult for us to come in, year out and say, oh, this is what we found, without having a design that allows us to pick up the species in question and put that down to, yes, they've increased in number or not. So we've put forward what we think is probably a reasonable way of assessing that, and that's partly based on some protocols that were developed by the MDBA and through our work as well. So presenting our findings, obviously this is a really important component for us. Otherwise, these just get locked away in reports that go to CMAs that get barely shared between, you know, maybe 15 or 20 interested parties. So we have to undertake put out our client reports as part of you know, contractual obligations. But we've also tried to get the messages out in magazine articles and videos and fact sheets that we put out on the internet, and, you know, community talks, like even the talk that we're doing tonight, you know, just sort of puts it out into the public sphere more so than what it would if we didn't do these talks. So we try to include talks to community groups at the end of each of our projects now as an output, just so we can share findings and, you know, hope that perhaps people come forward with some additional dams and, you know, for southern pygmy perch or other species. So providing recommendations, this is pretty much what we do at the end of all of our reports, and that goes across for all scientists, I guess, you know, across the country. So after 5 years of doing these surveys and having to think about, you know, we've got population models that have been constructed to have a look at how many populations we need, how big those populations need to be, how many females we need, how large the habitats need to be, whatnot. So there's a lot of information out there, and we've got a lot of scenario testing that we do. And this allows us to provide recommendations. So some of the ones that I've outlined here are the ones that I've put in our past reports. So we obviously are very strong on annual monitoring, so that we can, if there are detectable changes, that we can detect those changes with the methods that we use. We do need to align with different and more project partners. You know, it is the case that these projects rely on a lot of collaboration. So there's often 15 or 20 different groups and up to 40 or 50 or 60 people all sitting around the table at the end deciding what we've done right, what we need to improve on, that sort of thing. So the more the merrier. So genetic considerations is obviously something that we have discussed at the Tri-State Alliance, which is a small-bodied native fish specialist group that's really pushing forward with small-bodied fish translocations across northern Victoria. So we're obviously, we want to establish more population. So our goal was to establish 20 self-sustaining southern pygmy perch populations. We actually have this year started to repopulate southern pygmy perch into habitats where they have become locally extinct. So that was, you know, that's a big win for us because that was a year earlier than what we predicted. Another thing, as we mentioned before, is to include hydrologists in the decision-making processes from this point forward, because at the moment we're looking at some habitats that are fairly close to large rivers, and we need to understand the hydrological processes of drying, filling, maintaining, and changing water levels in those habitats. I also want to do an assessment on the removal of southern pygmy perch from populations where we have no idea how many fish are in those source populations for a start. So it becomes fairly evident that if you have 1,000 fish in a small stretch of creek, that if 4 or 5 lots of people attempt to take 200 or 300 of those fish out in the same year, that you might exterminate that population inadvertently. Another criteria that we've recommended to use in our pre-site assessments is eDNA sampling. So it's a fairly rapid means, and it's available for a lot of our small-bodied natives, well, either now or soon to be. The criteria is there to assess the DNA. So, yeah, as you can imagine, if we've got a huge lake system of a couple of hectares, it's pretty hard. We could go in and put in 1,000 nets and give you a pretty rough idea of what's there, but the eDNA is pretty conclusive. I mean, it's limited in its capacity to give us numbers, but it's a great tool for determining presence, absence.
Scott, can I ask a question about genetics?
Go for it.
I'm assuming that when you collect brood stock from different source populations, you try and keep them as separated as long as possible and then mix them when you reintroduce them? Or do you mix them in the farm dams and keep exact records of where they came from? Or do you go specifically on genetics from fin clips, or does it not matter?
Well, there's probably a lot of opinions about this, but we've decided to mix them in light of what we're trying to achieve. We have mixed those populations. We've only had very small numbers of fish originally. I think, you know, you can see here we had 486 founding brood stock from across those 4 creeks, some of which I think we were at 7s, and that took us quite almost a whole week, I think, to get those 13 individuals. So yeah, given the small numbers. And
so hang on, with that slide there,
yep,
in dam 4 you've got 2 different populations mixed. In dam 3, 3 populations.
Yep. Dam
2, 1, and dam 1, 2. Is that right? Is that how we interpret it?
That's how it was in 2017. It's markedly different now.
In what way?
Well, we've introduced more fish into those populations, and we've also intermixed fish from each of the dams into each of the other dams. So each time, so this is another part of our protocol, is that each time we go to one of these dams, and for argument's sake, if we take out 200 fish, I will use 100 of those fish to get translocated into another location. and I'll split the remaining 100 into 2 groups of 50 and put those 50 fish in each of the other 2 dams. So obviously one dam will miss out under that scenario, but we might put 33, fish in each of the 3 dams. So yeah, just to try to maintain that genetic integrity and the mixing.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
I'm sure there's people who have got different opinions on how those fish species, the genetic lineages should be kept distinct. But when you're talking about such fragmented populations that are likely to go extinct quickly, we've consulted with people at the Tri-State Alliance and geneticists at work and elsewhere, and we're all of the same opinion that we should be.
Scott, can I make a comment on that?
You sure can.
Yeah, it's Luciano Bergaray from Flinders University here. Your answers, based on the work we've been doing for the last 10 years, including with Southern Pygmy Perch, is absolutely spot on. So in fact, the Tri-State group often, search for advice from our lab about this, because we developed some of the approach to increase the genetic diversity and maintain genetic diversity in Southern Pygmy Perch and Yarra as well, Murray Hardyhead in captivity. So mixing from different sources is the way to go, especially if they are from the same catchment. But one thing that folks sometimes don't realize is that if you are sourcing from a population that has been small from a period of time, the chances are that you have many related individuals that are already inbred in that population. So those are the ones you really want to avoid. So I guess that if you have 4 sources, 4 different populations, and one of them that's been quite small for many generations, you better avoid that one altogether, because you might including inbred animals in your dam population. Does it make sense?
Yep, perfect sense. Thanks,
Yep,
Luciano. Yep, look.
Yeah, just a point. It's easy for us to identify those animals if we have the fin clips, but for folks who are in the field, you need to make the decisions right there, and the best information that you might have is about the long-term abundance or decline of those source populations, and that's very important in terms of genetic considerations.
Yeah, agreed. We're discussing some projects today with the CMAs, and we were putting forward ideas of locations where we want to stock the Southern Pygmy Perch, and we came up with 4 locations, and it was decided that we would put 200 Southern Pygmy Perch into each of those locations, but each of those Pygmy Perch, we would get fin clips from them, because it was likely that over the next 5 to 10 years that we would go back and survey those populations, and we could take fin clips at any stage over the following 10-year period, and we could look at genetic integrity per se over a 10-year period to see if there was any evidence of decline or truncation or bottlenecks and those kinds of things that would reduce the genetic integrity of those populations. So it is a really, really important factor, for sure. Oh. So look, the last slide was just to give you guys a basic overview of what we've been doing for the last 4 years with our Southern Pygmy Perch project. And this follows on from some other work that Craig Bice and others have been doing. Luke Pearce in New South Wales. I think Bice has been doing the work with Ian Ellis, and other members of the Tri-State Alliance have been doing some great work in other states. Stuart Little and Greg from the MDBA. John Conlon's doing some work on southern pygmy perch up at Nilluquin. So we're all in contact with each other regularly to pass on ideas and, you know, let each other know how our projects are coming along, whatnot. So that's a really important part of all of our projects and just learning in general. But so with the southern pygmy perch in northern Victoria, in the northeast and Golden Broken catchments, so the first year we pretty much just went through and loosely worked out a project outline, who was to be involved, who was going to be funding it, whether we should be translocating them into wild sites, whatnot, and it ended up that we decided to use farm dams because that was a lot less scary for a lot of people and allowed our translocation permits to go through. The following year, we translocated the 486 southern pygmy adults that came from that table that I showed you just previously. So we moved them from the wild into the 4 farm dams. The following year, we got another 500. We found some other locations, one in the King Valley and another from the limestone of the Granite Creeks region of the Golden Broken, where we got another 500 fish. So we translocated those into 2 dams and wetlands. We also used fish from our stock in our farm dams for those additional dams. 2020, COVID pretty much put a stop to any species translocations or us travelling up to assess any of the dams, which is a bit of a shame. But this year we went back three or 4 weeks ago and we translocated another 1,000 southern pygmy perch from our farm dams into some more refuge habitats and 2 creek sites, which are pseudo wild sites. There are manufactured sites, but they fall within the flood zone of some larger rivers, and that is still going on at the moment. We've got to go and do some talks in the next few weeks to some more potential dam owners, and hopefully they'll come on board and we can go through the 20 or 30, it was about 20 farm dams that we assessed a few weeks ago, and we're hoping that we can get a dozen sites out of those that we can put fish in and breed them up and maintain support for future funders, and, you know, to keep these sites kicking along and, you know, help to preserve the species. So I guess today's take-home message is that translocations are a valuable tool for threatened species conservation, provided that we can establish a translocation protocol per se. It would be nice to see that even the bodies that decide whether we can translocate species or not into locations or not, it would be nice to see them using the same process for everybody. You know, it's no good having a group come in using, you know, an established working process that is just not regarded, you know, when someone else comes in a year later and uses a different process. So whilst New South Wales have started moving more in this direction, you know, we've sort of fallen behind a little bit as far as those translocation procedures or processes are used. So, and act before it's too late. I guess that's the big take home for all small-bodied native fish species that are threatened or endangered or otherwise. So as I mentioned, I think at the start of the talk, you know, these projects, even though they seem small and they only involve small fish, the collaboration between groups is enormous. And these are some of the people, or these are some of the groups, and within those groups, there's sometimes dozens of people that contribute to the success of these projects. So I just wanted to give everybody in each of these groups a big shout out. And thanks guys for listening. Happy to answer any questions or take any comments or anything that you like.
Very good, Scott. Can you see the questions chat screen on your screen?
No, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yes, thanks.
Oh, there's a few more than I thought.
Can you see the chat screen now?
Nope.
Down the bottom.
Oh, from Sunny. Yeah, I can see that. Oh, hang on. Yep, chat.
If you click on that, there's a few questions and conversation. Maybe you could have a look at those.
Yeah. How do you mitigate the founder effects on translocation groups? Well, I guess that's what Luciano was trying to put forward. You know, the importance of mixing continually, so not just from the same, you know, source locations, but mix those groups between locations and between dams to try to avoid this. And I guess in some senses, you know, that gets avoided by the small number of species that you potentially collect from those fragmented habitats that haven't supported those populations very well. So if there's only 20 species in a pretty ordinary, you know, habitat creek, then you're obviously not going to be able to pick up a lot of individuals. So not a lot of individuals go into that population. But, you know, in saying that too, you know, and I do take Luciano's point, and, you know, he's very knowledgeable and experienced in this, that you often have some of those populations that have really rare genetics that otherwise would be lost if we didn't add those individuals into other populations. But that may be a small number. I'm not sure. But yeah. Yeah. So Luciano, how long those populations can reproduce till genetic issues arise. So look, that's something that's from Harvey. So that's something that we were actually talking about today. And I think I mentioned it earlier that we were going to take fin clips from each of the individuals that we put into these 4 new locations to determine, well, try to pick up if there's any genetic implications, some adverse genetic implications, I assume, post 5 years, you know, based on what Luciano brought up before, that, you know, you will get those individuals that breed more than others and outcompete and, you know, be more attractive and contribute more to the next population. And, you know, if those individuals, if the offspring from those individuals breed more often than other individuals, then you do have the potential for, you know, some sort of genetic collapse or reduction. Yeah, Sunny, go for it, mate. You had a quick question.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for that. That was really interesting.
Oh, that's good.
I had a quick question in regards to, I guess, the dam translocation. I've done a little bit of work with the southern purple spotted gudgeon, and I was wondering if you have plans to use a similar kind of rehabilitation process for any of the other small-bodied native species in the Victorian waterways?
Yeah, so there's the Tri-State Alliance and the CMAs, along with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, in the new Healthy Rivers program, are looking at translocating a number of different small-bodied species, including the southern purple spotted gudgeons and catfish, and potentially Rostratus, the flat-headed galaxid as well. So there's a range of different species. We've put forward project proposals where we've had fish in supplementary habitats, which is the one that I talked about today. And we've also failed to get funding for another project that we had, fish in shared housing. So the premise for that study was to get species that had variable genetic niches per se in wetland habitats and put them in together with the idea that both species, if there was no competition or predation or adverse impacts, that they could share those refuge habitats, because I guess that's one of the limiting factors to these studies, is finding those really suitable habitats. So yeah, look, there's a range of people, I think, doing a range of different species. I know some other guys at work looking at Yarra Pygmy perch. There's the southern form of the southern pygmies as well. NFA are doing some work. New South Wales are doing work on southerns and other species as well. So yeah, there's a range of groups doing a range of different species, but as far as I'm aware, nobody's really looking at shared habitat projects at the moment, unfortunately. So it's probably something that you know, should get up in the future. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you. And I just had one more quick question, if that's all right. As a university student, if we wanted to get involved in this project at all, is there any opportunity for us to help out with the field work?
Yep, sure. The more the merrier. It makes my life easier. Yeah, just drop us a line and yeah, we'll work out. Well, I think we're going up in, I'll just have a quick look. We're going up the last week of June. So we'll be sampling a couple of sites there, and if our translocation permits come through, we'll be translocating them to new refuge locations. And if the translocation permit doesn't come through, we'll be just swapping individuals between established farm bands. So yep, sure. Drop us a line and we'll work something out.
Awesome. Thank you.
It's all right. No worries.
Scott, there's a question here. Are landholders obligated to sign any sort of contract for the life of the surrogate dam project on their property? Because you obviously invest quite a lot of effort in assessing their dam and investing physical fish in it and so on.
Absolutely not. No, there's no obligation. I think that generally it's those people that are really interested in the project and, you know, biodiversity per se, whether it's fish or frogs or endangered whatever's, you know, some people just have a love for that sort of thing. And they're the kind of people that belong to, you know, groups like Landcare, which would predominantly go through to select our site or to acquire sites to assess for refuge habitat. So they're already interested, those people, but there's no legal obligation. It's, you know, we're just really relying on the relationships that we build with people and their interest in nature, I guess. That's it.
Have I missed any of the questions?
Can people legally privately breed them? I suspect that's probably the case if you can get hold of them legally.
Ben's been busy answering a few of the questions for you.
Okay, can anyone breed them? Not sure. Yeah, look, the problem with people just going out and collecting fish is, you know, it's a big problem potentially. You know, people get them from locations that they're relying on other people's, you know, information. Yeah, this is the southern form. I couldn't tell you what the southern form was from a northern form. So I don't know how you could rely on people collecting and then dispersing. You know, it's fine to mix, but at this stage, I don't think we're really wanting to mix the southern with the northern form.
Well, a good example of that is the southern pygmy perch that are found in the Campaspe River at Malmesbury. They're north of the divide, but they're actually Bass lineage because they've been translocated in the past.
Yeah, look, that's probably a more suitable question for a geneticist. But at this stage, I wouldn't have thought we would want to be going down the track of loose crossings, for a better word. You know, there's a lot of really well established problems, you know, that we've seen in reptiles, particularly with that sort of approach, which we want to avoid. You know, we're all here, you know, we're all fighting the good fight. We're all interested. We just, you know, we want to establish some protocols to prevent any, you know, anybody just going out there doing whatever they think is right, because often, you know, it doesn't perpetuate species, you know, and in some cases it's, you know, detrimental, particularly when people bring things in from overseas.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to make a record in the chat thing for Sunny of your email address, Scott, or can she contact you some other way?
Yeah, which you can contact me. You can contact me, Sunny, through ARI.
Your profile is on the ARI website. You're quite easy to find there.
Yep.
Any other questions, people?
I was just going to ask, if I may, is it if you leave things too long, and I'm more into the blackfish now than pygmy perch, but if you leave these things too long, it may get to a point where you have no choice but to crossbreed others, like the southern and the one from down here.
I completely agree. I just wouldn't like to make the call that we're at that stage at the moment. I think, you know, you would really have to get a round table of, you know, people like Luciano and Catherine Harrison, who, you know, Peter Unmack, those kind of, you know, people that have, you know, in-depth genetic experience to.
I asked the question because one of the problems we've got with the blackfish population is it's becoming, it's gone down into isolated groups in a lot of rivers. They're isolated from the next group, sometimes by 20 or 30 kilometres. That is going to be a problem in time if we don't do something about it. If 5 years, if they're in trapped in a pool for 5 years without interaction with more fish, is that a problem? Luciano might be able to help.
If I can make a few comments. First, just going, your point is correct, Steve. Like blackfish is in trouble. We have worked with them as well. But going back to the southerns, just for a moment, we have just provided a recommendation, which is going to the federal government about the different population units of southern pygmy perch. And we don't recognize a southern and a northern unit. What we have are multiple units separated by catchment. Basically, genetically, we can even date back when those catchments were connected. And it turns out that those catchments, especially in the northern part of the Murray-Darling Basin, they were connected just prior to European settlement, meaning that although the populations were a little different from a different catchment, they had the opportunity to become connected once in a while. And that's very important for the entire species, you know, like it gives more resilience to the entire species. It becomes a bigger population, right, with more diversity. Since Europeans arrived, we also managed to date that through genetic analysis. Those populations became increasingly isolated, and you folks who are there in the field, you know that, right? Sometimes it's absolutely impossible for a southern to move from a catchment to the nearby catchment unless folks translocate them there, just because there is no habitat available to enable that movement. So, like, we basically believe that if you, at this stage, there is no reason to put fish that are locally adapted to the lower lakes here around Adelaide, because it's such a very different environment than the fish from the upper reaches of the basin. But we believe that crossing fish along the upper reaches of the bays is not a problem at all. You know, like because as I just said, they were naturally connected in the past. And in fact, we have evidence for fish here from the lower lakes near the mouth of the Murray with that are related to fish up in Victoria, even thinking that they are not connected anymore. So my point is that moving fish locally, it's not a problem. But I completely agree that that needs to be made to be done in a concerted, organized effort. You know, we cannot have every individual person who is able to catch a pygmy perch to start breeding them and moving them. To begin with, in some states, this is not even allowed, right? You might get a big fine, you might get yourself in trouble. So it's a pity that Peter Umack's not here, because I think he's quite aware of the legislative requirements of you know, catching small fish in different states. I don't remember that from the top of my head, but for instance, you cannot do that here in South Australia for Yarra pygmy perch and southern pygmy perch. Yep. And blackfish, you know, they move very little. So like if they become isolated and folks to a point that the populations will decline, the extinction vortex will kick in, because you know these guys will be coming bred.
Yes,
you know,
that's one of the problems with inbreeding, isn't it? It can lead to well, they call it mulism.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Inbreeding will drop the fecundity, will drop you know, the number of eggs, fertilization success. This is all established. We don't need additional proof for that.
So that's a time bomb we've got waiting right now with blackfish, is that this could happen in the next 10 or 15 years, where these isolated populations, if they're not brought back together soon.
Yeah, I don't know the time frame, but I know that that's a problem for many fish, especially the small fish, right?
Yeah. Well, I know one of the things with small fish, of course, is they probably breed more often than blackfish. So any mutation would multiply quickly, whereas with blackfish, because of their slow breeding, they may not multiply. Those problems may not multiply as quickly. That's only a guess, of course. I don't know. But I know there's a bit of a time bomb waiting if we don't do something soon. We've done eDNA tests here of the Curtis River in southern Victoria, southwest Victoria, and there is no blackfish left in it. The whole thing. It's a disgrace.
It's gone.
Gone. Just gone. Out of the Cooramungal Creek, out of the Scotts Creek, out of all the tributaries that run into the Curtis, it's all gone. Not a blackfish left.
Ripe for a translocation project.
Hey?
It sounds ripe for a translocation
Well,
project.
I'm trying my damnedest, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
I've got 16 fish here that could, if the DNA comes back okay, that they could go somewhere to start a new population. So I'm hoping, waiting, seeing.
Yeah, I think Tamo and Dan Stossel have done a little bit of work with blackfish, so they'd be probably some important people to speak to. You know,
Tamo's been here. He done the fin clips.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Great. Well, at least somebody who's very experienced and knowledgeable is onto it. He's a great asset to have on side.
Yeah.
Gerald Lyon is looking for a new blackfish translocation project and captive breeding project as well, from fish from Victoria. Yeah, Gerald Lyon.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I've got a fish farm. I'm breeding blackfish here now.
Might need a few more than 16, but
no. It's only the 16 I bred.
I think
they're 6 years old.
Yeah, right.
That's how long.
You know, we can sit down and have a chat about it. You know, Jared's my boss, so if he's got something going, then you know we can all sit around and work out a.
I bred the blackfish 10 years ago.
Yep.
Stephen, I think you need to do a presentation in the future. You sound like you're a wealth of information.
Well, I don't know about that, but I come from a farmer's perspective rather than the other way around. And I bred them 10 years ago, and it's taken me, I've kept some have been sold. I was allowed to sell some to aquarium people. But I've kept these particular fish to give to fisheries, and it's taken me 6 years to get to fin clip and get them DNA tested. So if it takes another 6 years to get them translocated, I'm going to be an old man. You know, we've got to get on with these things. We haven't got the time. I'm trying to get a creek down here in southern, and this might interest you people with your pygmy perch, trying to get a piece of creek rehabilitated so that it holds water all year round rather than just in the wet. It's been damaged severely because of farm settlements, and it's basically it's become a drain that drains in the summer. The water just runs out of it. So what I'm trying to do is introduce some weirs back in it, some leaky weirs, timber weirs or some such thing, so we can hold some of that water back, put some blackfish and pygmy perch in behind it, you know, and rehabilitate that piece of river, that piece of creek. So that's what I'm trying to do now to see the local CCMA here in Coringamite Shire.
Good stuff, Steve. That's very good. We look forward to hearing about that in the future.
Well, I'm hoping to get down to it soon, yeah.
I just wanted to come down and have a look. No other questions, folks?
It's just a comment.
Yes, Luciana?
No, it's I just posted one very non-technical magazine article that we have on southern pygmy perch, yaras, muddy hardy head, a bit of blackfish, and purple spotted gudgeons there that we wrote together with Michael Hammer on, you know, how genetics can guide some of this management of small fish that are under trouble at the moment. So in case people are interested.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah,
that's great.
I'd be very interested in that, Luciana.
Yep.
There's a link there, Stephen, in the chat box. Mind you, the link hasn't opened for me. It's trying to. I trust it will.
It opens for me, but that's my website, so I don't know if it's
I think we might wrap it up there. I feel selfish in asking Scott about crayfish questions. I can do that in private.
No, that's fine. I think somebody else had a
Can you spend 4 or 5 minutes just telling us about the situation with Murray crays at the moment? How are they doing? Are they in real strife, or are they?
Well, that's what we're trying to work out. But look, this all started. You know, we've obviously got the 20-year cray project that we discussed at Barmer, and it's fairly loose. It's long-term monitoring. It's not very precise outside of the, you know, decadal trend sort of information. So that led us to look at whether we were capable of detecting changes, what sort of power we had from using the nets and the locations and the design. So we went in with the biometricians, and they come up with a design where we would survey half of the river. So we would do 200 meters on, 200 meters off, and I think that was 16 sites. So that, I think that was about just over 6 kilometers worth of reach. So, and that was in a river reach at Barmer that was above that was impacted by the black water, and therefore it hadn't been fished supposedly for a period of the last 10 years, I guess. So when we went back and did an in-depth analysis of what we found that the fishing regulations that only required anglers to determine whether a crayfish in the harvest slot legal limit had eggs or not didn't provide any information about the sex of the crayfish. So
unless it was physically in berry.
even well, not the point. The point is that not all females in the harvest slot limit are in berry. So if the regulations are based on all of those females, which it pretty much is, well over 90% is the assumption. Well, actually, in the model, it's 100% that the females of females between 10 and 12 centimeters, which is the slot limit, buried is wrong. So when we looked at a whole range of harvest scenarios, from not harvesting females to the current harvest scenarios, the scenario that provided the greatest risk to the Murray spiny crayfish population was the current harvest scenario. So we've put forward some recommendations to alter that to having a moratorium potentially on the harvest of female crayfish, or at the very least educate anglers, which is probably the easiest, cheapest, preferred method, to teach anglers to be able to determine sexes. And if that was the case, that they could do that, then they could alter the regulations to not harvesting females. And under that scenario, that was a far better scenario risk-wise than the current harvest strategy. So that's the method that we've put forward. We also found recently that the age structure of the cohorts of crayfish in the last 10 years, in the last 4 years of our surveys, of our more intense surveys, have shown that there's still crayfish that are being harvested. And this is, well, poached, I guess is the correct terminology, given that you're not allowed to fish for crayfish below Tocumwal in the Murray. So I guess they're the two big things. You know, we've got some projects coming up where we're looking at, so in that first paper that we put out last year, we also went through and we put forward a different index, a different reproductive index than has been previously used. So in the past, they've used size at the onset of sexual maturity as the indicator of reproduction, basically. So under the premise that if a certain percentage of females are reproductive at a given size, then they can or can't be harvested. So what that was saying to us was that all of the females of a given size were presumed to be reproductively active at a given size, which is incorrect. So, but based on that premise, you know, that premise has repercussions, which is why they changed the slot limit. So it came back from a study that 98%, I think, of females were buried at 92 millimeters, the occipital carapace length, which is how they measure them. Mm-hmm. So what they said from that was, if that's the case, using the basic tenet that every individual needs to be provided a capacity to contribute to the next population, we'll give them a year to breed, because somebody came up with the notion, the unfounded notion, that crayfish grow at a centimetre per year. So putting those assumptions together, they went, well, we'll give the females a year to breed before they go into the harvest slot. So our data showed that that wasn't the case. So you know, we had up to 50% in some locations of the females within the slot limit and above not carrying eggs. Whilst we can't say that it's the case across the board. There are populations, or there are species of crayfish in the Northern Hemisphere that only breed in alternate years. We're not saying that that's the case, but what we are saying is there's a lot of females that are potentially open to harvest that haven't had the opportunity to breed. That's what we think. So what we did, instead of using a sort of adjunct measure of reproduction, we come up with the notion of looking at size at functional reproduction. So, which was a bit of a hard sell actually at the start. You know, it pretty much came down to the point that we had to use humans as a surrogate to get the idea across, because, you know, whilst 13-year-old female humans are capable of sexual reproduction, they really don't contribute to the human population per se.
Analogy at all.
Thank goodness. But in the case of crayfish, we wanted to use an indicator that showed functional reproduction, and that was the presence of eggs. So if you had eggs, it's a far better measure that you are going to be capable of reproducing and contributing to the next year's generation than you being of a particular size based on, you know, models and whatnot. So even though we did use models to look at our scenarios, it was all based on realistic data. So so look, that's pretty much where we've ended up at the moment. We're going back this year in a couple of weeks to do that intent study again, because what we've noticed is that there's been a decline not only in the abundance of animals in that population, but of specific size classes in that population. So it's, you know, we've got some poachers with a conscience, if you will. So they tend to be leaving large females, but any males in the slot, or females without berries, they're all going. So we mark them all, and we go back week after week after week after week, and they're being removed. That's our argument. Whilst there could be other things going on, that's the most likely scenario, given that, you know.
Do males only reproduce? Does one male reproduce only with one female in a season, or does one male service lots of females? Is there any way of determining that?
Yep, there is, and people have done that overseas. And in similar species, the males carry their sperm in sperm packets called spermatheca, and they attach those to the underside of the females, close to the genital openings, and the females can choose whether to use that or not. So, but the unfortunate thing for the males in this particular Northern Hemisphere species was they pretty much get 3 cracks at reproducing in a season, because the mating season is fairly restricted. So the first bunch of spermatheca that they have is, you know, they say, well, this is 100% volume. This is the max that they can carry. So they may allocate that to a number of females. Often large females will seek out the largest males to mate with, and the males instinctively know that they need more sperm. So the sperm packets that they provide for the larger females are larger. So, but once they get rid of that sperm packet, it takes them over a week to regenerate the sperm, but they only ever regenerate to about 50% of the original volume. And, you know, if in this species, that's a 3-week breeding period, then you're only going to get three goes.
Understand.
And they're going to decline, obviously. But look, there's other behavioural implications as well. Large females prefer to mate with the same size or larger males. And the way that they've determined this is that the damage done by females to males is proportional to the reduction in size of the males that try to mate with the female. So if 100 mil, male tries to mate with 120 mil female, she won't be happy. He might lose a few appendages. Whereas if, she's 100 mil and something even smaller tries to mate with her, then she will potentially kill him, because he's got to pretty much subdue her, and that would be a feat in itself. If you're an 80 mil male going up against 130 mil female, she's probably 4 times your weight and angry.
So in your professional opinion, Scott, what's the best compromise to keep anglers happy and to ensure the success of the species?
I think the simplest thing, is what I mentioned before, is for people to know the difference between males and females, and just to
then act how.
So if you look at the underside of a female crayfish, look, this traditional owner, I tried to explain this nicely to this guy for about 5 minutes. And he said to me, mate, why don't you just say the females have got boobs and the males have got testicles? Because when you turn them around on the top of I think it's the third, well, it is the third leg.
Yep.
There's 2 gonopores. And they've often, if they've got eggs, they'll have hair around those gonopores. But they're on the third pair of walking legs. And on the bottom pair of walking legs, you have these, they're males, that you have an aversion called a male papillae. So they are in the shape of low-hanging fruit, as you'd imagine. So that's the easiest way to tell a male from female. Often people say, and it is true from my understanding, if you can look at a crayfish from the back and you can tell the females, they've got a wider tail, simply because they've got to carry their eggs.
Yeah, right. Stephen, did you have a question?
I was just going to say, it sounds very similar to the yabby. The females have got like a little window on their last legs, and then the males have got a little appendage.
Should be only on the middle set for the female and the last or 5th set for the male.
Yeah, like a little window that's almost like a mirror.
Little buttony things.
Yeah.
So
that's how it was pointed out to me anyway. One's got tits and one's got dick.
Thank you. Scott, so your angler knows the boys from the girls. What now?
And just put the females back.
Okay, so all right. So if they're allowed to fish males within a certain size range, but not allowed to fish any females, what are the long-term prospects of how that'll affect the population?
Well, I think that's what the current regulations are attempting to get across to anglers at the moment. It's just, I think they had the best intentions, honestly, assuming that, the information that was provided to them will be that all of the females in that slot limit will have eggs. So there's no requirement to tell the difference between males and females. It's just turned out not to be the case.
Yeah.
And we don't know if it's just the case here, at Barmer. I presume that it's not, because all of the information across our state and New South Wales shows that impacts from harvest, being, variable sex ratios and whatnot, are not only variable, but they can be quite striking, up to 9-to-1. So there's obviously implications.
9-to-1.
Yep. So most of the time in the populations that we've studied, it's 2-to-1, but that varies. So this is probably quite a good indicator of the impact of what's going on in Barmer, is that the sex ratio in those animals below the harvest slot limit is 1-to-1, or as close to 1-to-1. It's 1.13-to-1. So just argument's sake, say it's 1-to-1. Within the slot limit, it's 2 to 1. And above the slot limit, it's 4 to 1. So we think that above the slot limit, is potentially a harvest legacy. But within that slot limit, you would assume that over a 10-year period, that those juveniles that were below the slot limit, that were in the 1-to-1 sex ratio, would have grown into that slot limit within the 10-year period. So it should still be 1-to-1, given, the basic tenet of, sex in decapods outside of temperature impacts should approximate 1-to-1, and they don't.
So why is that?
Well, we put it down to, we think that people are selectively harvesting males.
So some fishermen do know the difference between the boys and the girls.
Well, yeah.
Could you end up with a situation where you have not enough males?
You definitely can, and it's pretty widely documented around the world in crustaceans. It's called sperm limitation. So there's been a lot of work in crabs and that sort of stuff. So, I think we kind of tried to touch on it without, using the terminology before. If you have a lot of small males, then they're not going to get the opportunity to breed. If you have, which is probably a very similar argument, only limited numbers of large males, and they're not going to be able to service, if you will, the egg requirements of all of these large females. If there's up to 9 times the number of females than males, then things are looking pretty grim as far as, reproductive output.
So would a slot ban be a better way than a female ban? I mean,
well, we already have that.
Like there's certain parts of the river you just don't fish for that year. Maybe it can be reopened the next year, but that year, for a year, it's closed.
I completely agree. There's a lot of alternatives that we could employ to, if we thought that the species was in trouble. There's a lot of evidence, around the globe, a lot of different strategies that you can use, for only harvesting, every other year, once in every 5 years. You can only harvest from this stretch of river. I mean, it's a bit unfortunate for the old cray that the time that they're out and about with young falls right smack bang in the middle of the harvest season. And that's probably because those two things are correlated. They're moving around a lot because that is their breeding season, and well, not just a breeding season, but that's their gestation period. So they're out and about, feeding in the cooler water, and that happens during winter, and that's smack bang in the middle of our harvest season. So
there's a question from Harvey. Can female crows not store the male sperm?
Yeah, I don't know how long for. I don't know. I know that they can take their time, so they can have the sperm packet on them for at least a couple of weeks. So what they could potentially do is upgrade, from a not so attractive male of, a certain size to, here's a crayfish that is bigger and, better by all accounts for reproduction. So she may choose. I don't know if that's the case, but I do know that they have the ability to hold on to those spermatheca. They don't utilize them for up to a couple of weeks at least. So
we should wrap it up shortly. You mentioned that you've made some submissions, some recommendations regarding your work with the crays. Who are they submitted to, and
so those were in our last paper that I can give to you, and you can you can provide that put it on your website or
available to anyone that wants to see it in our group.
Yep. So that's, well, I'm hoping that in the future, we really pick up our work with the crays, because I'm really focused and dedicated on finding out a little bit more about why, you know, I think it's our most harvested threatened species in the country. So particularly, you know, well, certainly for crustaceans anyway, you know, it seems to be operating on the back of a ministerial order, which, you know, I don't want to go into policy, but yeah, it's strange that it's on or was on threatened species list, and it was widely harvested and now has fallen off the list. But, you know, for the lack of data apparently, so it'd be nice to put it back on the list.
Well, that's part of the work you're doing.
Yeah, hopefully that's the aim of the game. You know, we can't really say whether or not it should be closed, or, you know, all we can say is that it is data deficient. It requires more research so we can answer some of these questions.
Absolutely.
We're on our way to doing some more work on reproduction, and, you know, we've got some detection analyses that have recently been given to the biometrician. So we've got the results from that. So I'm writing that paper up at the moment, and we've got some harvest impacts, another harvest impact paper coming out, looking at, you know, whether or not we can use sex ratios, you know, are they a good indicator or not, which is probably something that should be reviewed, you know, more broadly than just crayfish. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that a lot of information that I thought would have been out there on crayfish that's not. It's pretty under researched, I think, from my perspective.
Baffling for such an iconic species.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. Scott, that was a fantastic presentation, and all the follow-up afterwards. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, you're welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining. What a great night.
Thanks, Rick. You're correct too, by the way. I checked.
About, yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
All right, guys, we'll leave it there. Thanks for that.
Thank you. I'll be in touch, Greg.
Good on you. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Bye.